like waiting for the curtain to rise, right?
No.
Definitely hush. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to see us. It has long been a dream of mine to have Kim Fay at the Poison Pen. I was wildly in love with her first book, but we never got a chance to meet. And so I'm very pleased that she is here with her gorgeous new book, which is behind me, Love Saffron. Thank you. Our staff member, John Charles, is passionate about this book, as am I. So he is going to actually do the conversation with Kim. So I'm going to step aside. I'm Barbara Peterson, the Poison Pen, and this is Scottsdale, Arizona, for those of you who don't know us. So thanks for joining us.
Hello, and when Barbara asked me if I wanted to do this event, I could not have been more delighted, because when I read Love Saffron a few months ago, it became one of the best books I've read in years, and I say that in all sincerity. It was a difficult time for all of us these last couple years, but Kim's book reinforced my belief in the humanity of the world, and that's not saying, I'm not trying to say that to be grandiose or anything. It's one of the most beautifully written, the most empathetic, the most deep books in a quiet way, and so I was delighted to do that. Now I'm going to stop talking and introduce Kim.
Hello, everybody. Most of you know me. I've got a hello.
For those that are out in the internet tuning in, I always like to know about an author before they started writing, and you have another side to your life. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, kind of. I started writing when I was 10. So
Okay.
You mean before I started publishing, maybe?
That might be it. Or did you always want to be a writer?
I always wanted to be a writer.
Okay.
So I've been writing. I wrote my first book when I was 10 years old. I hand wrote it, and I mailed it to Random House. And they mailed it back because, it was written by a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
That was when you did a self-addressed stamped envelope. And I still have them, as my sister who's in the audience knows, because she had to check them out. So I would write a book, and then she would check it out from the library. But before I became a professional writer, I was a bookseller. So when I got out of college, I started working at the Elliott Bay Book Company in Seattle, and I was there for 6 years. And then I moved from there to teach English in Vietnam.
Oh.
And while I was there, that's when I started writing professionally, because there were very few Americans in Vietnam at the time, so it was an opportunity to do a lot of writing about the country for publications back home. And then that led to travel writing, which then led to my first novel, and then to this novel.
And your new book is Love Saffron. It's an
Yes.
epistolatory?
Epistolary.
There you go. It's told in the form of letters, let's put it that way. Tell us, those who are not familiar with the book, a little bit about it and what prompted you to write it.
Okay. So the book begins in the early 1960s when a young food writer in Los Angeles sends a fan letter to a magazine writer in the Pacific Northwest. And she sends her a recipe, and she sends her a little gift of saffron from her travels in the Far East. And this letter sparks a response, and the two women begin writing back and forth for the next few years over the course of a lot of historical events like the Kennedy assassination, the Cuban Missile Crisis, but also through just a lot of both the ups and the downs of their own lives. And I started writing. So Los Angeles locked down in March of 2020. And the day after the lockdown started, I started writing this book. And I'd been working on 3 other books at the time. I'd been working on a middle grade book, I'd been working on a mystery book, I'd been working on a historical novel. But the lockdown came, and I opened my computer and I started writing this, and that was it. I kept writing, and 3 months later the book was done.
Yes.
And I wasn't writing it for publication. I was writing it as a gift for 2 friends of mine.
Oh.
And so for the reasons that you've kind of talked about liking the book, that was the reason I wrote the book. I wanted to write this book for these 2 women and offer them a little bit of comfort and offer them an opportunity to escape for just a little bit into this world. And I will say both of the women also were part of the inspiration for the story as well. So.
What made you decide to do it in the form of letters instead of just a regular?
I wish some of these questions had answers that
were brilliant.
Yes, or just had answers, because I started writing in letters. One of the women, who inspired the book is my friend Janet, and she and I have been corresponding for 27 years. And so for a long time, I have wanted to write something in the form of letters, because I love the letter writing format. I love the correspondence she and I have had over all these years and what's come of it. I love books like 84 Charing Cross Road. I mean, you can't talk about books and letters and not mention that book. And I had actually, a while back, written a couple of these letters in a sketch form, but I couldn't really figure out how to put it together. And I think once the pandemic struck and there was just this, here you are, and you're here for a while and you don't know what's going to happen next, I grabbed onto those and started off, and it just carried me through the story. But I love the back and forth that happens in letters, and I love the intimacy of writing letters. I love that you sit and you put words on the page for another person, and then you put that in the mail, you send it to them, they read it, then they do the same thing back, and you go back and forth.
I think one of the characters in the book mentions kind of the magic of receiving a letter in the mail. And there is something that is lost today just in generic emails, and there is that magic to letter writing, because you don't really keep a box of emails.
No, you don't. We've had this discussion with people who say, when emails first started, we printed them. Because we associated them with letters, but then we realized, oh God, you cannot print every email you ever get in your life. But yeah, we all, probably anybody of a certain age, has a box of letters from somebody, whether it's parents or an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend. But you keep them because they're a diary. They're a record of a very specific time in your life.
I think one of the other themes of your books, if we can call it that, is because it's set in the 1960s, it's also a time when food and cooking and the whole kitchen recipe thing was changing in America. That's when Julia Child kind of introduced her book, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And there's a lot about food in the book. Was that on purpose? Is that your own interest?
I didn't intentionally set out to write a food fiction book, but because Joan is based on a food writer, it naturally happened, because the younger character of Joan is based on Barbara Hansen. She's a pioneering food writer in Los Angeles that nobody knows about. She is the woman who started writing about Mexican food in the LA Times when nobody else was writing about it. She was going to restaurants all around the city that were of other cultures in the 1960s and introducing them to people through the newspaper. And so the more I wrote, Barbara inspired the character, and Barbara's life is food, so it ended up just weaving itself naturally into the story. And then I was also, when I think about Imogen, I think about me growing up in a very all-American limited food culture, and how, as I got older, how it was introduced into my life. And just the curiosity and my own growing knowledge about food, the different things that I liked. So it was, again, a lot of it just happened very organically.
It feels that way. Another thing is, you don't shy away from some of the social issues of the time, but you do it in a very, to use your word, organic way. It's not thrust into the story, because things were different back then and things were changing.
That was really unintentional. After the book sold, so this was after I'd written it, my agent had sold it to an editor. My editor said, let's talk about the social issues and that aspect of it. And I said, huh? What social issues? And she went, this and this and this. And I went, oh, I didn't realize that I was doing it, because to me it was just a natural part of these women's lives and what they were facing at that time. For example, Barbara Hansen, she was, she graduated from Stanford College. She couldn't get a job. She worked as a receptionist, and then she went back to get her degree. She was a journalist, but she could only work in the women's papers. And that was the only job for her. And so I think telling the story, you couldn't help it but explore some of these things, because that's what women were exploring during that time.
What was the biggest challenge in writing the book for you as a writer?
This book?
Yeah. Or were they all challenges?
Well, no, this one is just, no other writers want to hear this. There was no challenge. It just happened.
Well, sometimes you do that.
My first book took 14 years.
You paid your dues.
Yes, I did. So, and every other book I was working on, I'd been working on for 2 years, 3 years. I revise, I go back, I go forth. I once made my writing group read a 600-page version of my first novel. I mean, it went all over the board. But this book, I think because there was no stake, you know, it was a gift for friends. I wasn't thinking, boy, I hope my agent likes this. I hope my agent can sell this, which when you write a book, that's always in the back of your head. You don't want it to be, but it is. And it kind of, it can be a little comfort. And by doing that, I was also, I think, giving myself a lot of comfort, because I was writing about a lot of things I really love.
Now, you wrote this during the pandemic, and we're just kind of reaching, hopefully, the closing end of that cycle, for better or for worse. How challenging was it to put this book out into the marketplace at this point in time as a writer compared to the past?
It's actually, it was interesting when, you know, the editor bought it, and that part of the process was pretty normal. But when it went to go out into the world, it was very scattershot, because nothing, all the publications are different now. They all deal with, the media deals with things differently, the timing of things, and of course bookstores. This is only the third time I've been in a bookstore. Since the book came out. All of the events have been on Zoom, which have been fun in their own way, because I have, well, for example, Barbara Hansen, who Joan is based on, has been able to watch every event, which has been really fun. She's actually attended all of my readings, which she wouldn't have been able to do
in person.
And I also wouldn't have been able to do, I think we had Zoom before all this happened, but we didn't know what it could do. I'm doing 3 book clubs next week, one in Alaska, one in Marin County, and one somewhere else. But they're all on Zoom, which means you can pop into somebody's living room and spend time. And I do love the face-to-face and the personal aspect of it, but it's also nice to be able to do that as well.
Now, in addition to writing yourself, you have taught writing. Do you still teach writing?
I teach writing. I work in volunteer in a neighborhood program. So I was waving because 2 of my writers are here. I've done, we had a teen writing program for many years, and now I teach writing to the Women in the Neighborhood program. So it's not a formal, I wouldn't say it's not formal in the sense of
like
I'm not teaching, I'm not teaching at a university or a community college or anything like that. It's very much about what the women want to write. So each person's working on, one woman is working on a writing fiction.
What do you think is the most important skill that people need to develop as a writer?
Believe in yourself.
Okay.
That would be it. Because most people who tell me that they aren't writers are, but they stand in their own way. I mean, I work with women now. I work with one woman, and she is so sweet, and she's so shy about her writing. She is the funniest writer I have read in years. I mean, this woman just cracks us up constantly, and it's really clever. But she stands in her own way because she doesn't believe that she's a writer. You know, she's in her 70s. She's never written before. She can't be a writer. She thinks. And when I worked with the kids, there's not a single one that didn't have some really good writing at some point when they let themselves do it, when they trusted themselves and let themselves go.
After I read Love Saffron, I saw an essay that you had written, I think it was online, about Laurie Colwin, and that just reinforced my already astronomical opinion of you. Because she's one of the authors that I most treasure, and I remember running to the bookstore and getting her essays when they came out. Can you talk about Laurie Colwin, how she influenced you, maybe?
Definitely. Well, there's a personal, not in that I met her influence, but there's personal and professional, my admiration for her. But when Laurie Colwin is a novelist, but she's also she writes food essays,
yeah.
And she has 2 fantastic books of food essays, and I've been a fan for a very long time. But when I was in my early 20s, I wrote a novel, and I got an agent, and the agent said, "You write exactly like Laurie Colwin." And I thought, "Oh, who's that?" And so I went and I bought the book Happy All the Time. That was the book he had compared it to. And I read the book, and I just fell in love with it. And for a long time, I thought I probably fell in love with it because he compared me to her, and I was so flattered. But I actually read Happy All the Time every January.
Wow.
So it's one of those books that I just read to just kind of give myself a smile, and it's comforting. But she writes about food so honestly because she's not fancy. You know, she writes about her messy kitchen and her messy life, and she really was the first food writer. I mean, obviously we had MFK Fisher, and we had a lot of, very important food writers before that, but Laurie Colwin really humanized food writing, and I think she's the person who changed it for all of the writers who are writing today. And I still go back, and I made her tomato pie recipe the other day, which is my favorite of hers. My cookbook is just, as you read in the essay, is marked and smeared, and I don't know why when I cook I put like exclamation points besides the recipes and then highlight them with big wow, and it's my, but I when I look at it I can practically see every time I made that recipe. But I just like that she's so down to earth, and that's not always easy to come by in writing.
A real sincerity to her writing, because she's talking to you, not at you. It's like you're sharing a connection with. And then
the heartbreak, because she died when she was 48. It was a heart condition.
I think so, yeah.
And it was just really at the height of her career, and so that also there's a real sentimentality.
Yeah, it's kind of sad to think of what she could have done if she'd been around longer, but at least we have those.
Oh, she would have had fun with the internet. She definitely would have had a good time.
Now, one of your other careers was as a bookseller.
Yes.
Do you think that has helped you become a better writer? What do you take from that?
Yes. Well, let's put it this way. I went into the bookstore reading Harlequin romances. I came out of the bookstore reading Laurie Colwin and other authors. When I was growing up, I read a lot of, Beverly Cleary, Judy Blume, all of the kids' books that people were reading. But then I just read a ton of romances, and I think it mostly was about accessibility. We had those little strip mall bookstores, and you would go in, and if you like to read, you read whatever you find on the shelves. And when I started working at the bookstore, I discovered 2 things. I discovered how many different kinds of books there are, but how many different kinds of readers there are, because I didn't really realize that. I didn't know. I worked there for 6 years, and the amount of people who came in and asked for something completely different from the last 10 people who came in. And it was so much fun to see that there was a reader for everything, and I think that influenced me just as much as learning the craft from good writers by reading them. Because that was where, I had a really nice professor in college, but, he was nice, and I was okay, and we worked together, but I don't think, it wasn't really a professional writing program. And so I learned I learned how to be a true writer from reading.
And I think also probably as a bookseller, you also had to, I think the challenge is when people want you to help them find a book, you want to put your thoughts into that, and you have to hear what they're saying to you.
Yeah, definitely. I would still get on those little, I would want to hand sell a book, and I can remember one month I'm like, I'm going to hand sell 100 copies of Moon Tiger. I'm going to make people buy this book. They're going to buy this book. But at other times, you would listen to them. And because you worked with so many people who read so many different things, you knew when you were out of your element. And you would say, hey, Steve, or, you know, hey, Janet, can you come over here and help this person? And then we all exchanged ideas, so we all knew what other people, you know, you could make a recommendation based on your other booksellers.
Speaking of book recommendations, what have you read that you want to share with other readers?
I've been all over the board. I was really hard because I'm a huge reader, and I didn't really read during the pandemic.
Oh.
I had a tough time. I counted, I read maybe 5 books in that first year. I really, really struggled. I'm way behind everybody else, but what is it? I'm reading, it's Anxious People by...
Oh, yeah. Starts with a B.
Thank you. Frederick Bachman.
Yeah.
Bachman, yeah. And so everybody else I know has read all of his books, and they love him so much. And I've wanted to read his book, so I picked up Anxious People. It's interesting, when I went up in Northern California to bookstores, I had each bookstore recommend one book to me. So I'm reading Anxious People, and really, he's a very, I don't know, I think I expected something more straightforward from him, and he's not. And
That's
I'm really liking the way, how playful he is. I'm also reading a book which is really interesting. It was also recommended to me. It's called A Different Distance, and it's actually a book of poetry. And the reason I bring it up, it was recommended to me because of Love Saffron. During the first year of the pandemic, 2 poets living in France who were good friends wrote poem letters back and forth to each other for the first year. And as they did this, it's really a chronicle of that first year of the pandemic. And so it reads like a novel. It reads like a story, but sometimes I'll just read a sentence, and they've so captured an aspect that all of us experienced, you know, by being either isolated or just this
nervous
or uncomfortable or frustrated. You know, a lot of sadness, a lot of anger in that. You'd think I'd be better at this. There's also, I just finished, oh golly, I can't think of the name. It was about the airplane that takes off from France and hits a pocket. And when it hits the pocket, it lands on the other side. But then 3 months later, it lands again with the exact same people on board. And so or maybe it was going to Paris. But so the plane lands twice. And so now there are 2 sets of people. And the anomaly. The anomaly. It's called The Anomaly. And it was really interesting, because it was what do you do with the second set of people who've come through this warped pocket of time?
Yeah, that is.
And especially since they've come 3 months behind. They're 3 months behind the people who've landed, so they haven't experienced all the things that they're exact same people. It was one of those books that had a lot of ideas in it. And it was fun to try and figure. I'm not very good at science, so it was really fun to try and figure out how the mathematics of it and how it was all working.
You mentioned Laurie Colwin. Are there any other authors that have played a big role in your life as a reader?
I would definitely say MFK Fisher as well, because she wrote with such heart. I think, you know, her passion for living, and it's mostly her nonfiction. Fiction's not the best, but but her nonfiction is so beautiful. I did mention Moon Tiger. That was a book that really influenced me, because it showed me.
Is that Penelope Lively?
It's Penelope Lively, but it showed me how you can write a book without a straightforward structure. And I'd never seen that before. I mean, books were miraculous to me when I would start reading these books that were done in a different way. And her structure of writing in the first person and third person from the same character, and then shifting around in time, you know, back and forth in time, was something that I looked at that and went, oh, there are all sorts of ways that you can write a book. I did read 84 Charing Cross Road while I was writing this, because I was so interested. 84 Charing Cross Road is a letter that a New Yorker in the 1950s writes to a bookseller in England,
London. Yeah.
London,
Mm-hmm.
asking for a book. And she asks for this book, and they begin corresponding, and it's a true story. But the correspondence just becomes very personal, and then all the people in the bookstore get involved in different ways, writing to her. And what I love about it, you have the letters, and you have the gaps between the letters. And so the gaps between the letters is where the reader gets to fill it all in, and the reader gets to participate in the story and be a part of it. And that to me was something that was really fun to think about in here. What do you want to put in, but what do you want to let the reader fill in? Yeah. And as you talk to people, you realize the readers fill in the gaps in many different ways. I know in my mind what happened, but the readers all have their own stories as well. And a lot of readers I've noticed have really made a personal investment in the story.
Yeah, 84 Charing Cross Road was amazing, and it's hard to think of a time when there was no Amazon. You just didn't get a book in 2 days. If a book went out of print, that was it. You had to find another copy somewhere. So it's almost like it is going back in time.
It is, and it was you had to hunt. I mean, she would send them something, and then they would go to these book auctions and other stores and searching, which is what we did in the 1990s at Elliott Bay.
Really?
I was in the special orders department, and somebody would come in with a special order, and we did big volumes, the Bowker's books in print.
Oh, that's right.
And we had all the little publishing houses, and we had these used bookstores we would contact, and everything was kept on a 3x5 card. There was no computer at all. And we would check it off and move it over, and you'd make phone calls. You could spend a half a day making phone calls trying to find a book for somebody. And it was just and then it changed overnight. Yeah.
It's lost a little bit of its magic in the process.
It has.
But
it has.
Speaking of technology, how has social media impacted you as an author?
This is interesting because when I published my first book, there was no Instagram.
Oh.
So there were no bookstagrammers, there was no authors of Instagram, and I have discovered the loveliest community of people on Instagram. The people who are passionate about books, they've developed, I actually just like to read their conversations that they'll have, because they will talk about how much they all mean to each other and thank each other for, I always check your page because I know that you read things I like, and thank you so much. And there was a lot of conversation about how they all really kind of saved each other during the pandemic, because it was a community where they could go and talk about the books they were reading. And they've been so generous and so lovely, and their photography is gorgeous. I mean, they do beautiful things with books. But it's completely, I don't know, because I don't really use Twitter a lot, and I use Facebook a little bit, but I've just discovered that it's a fun world, and it doesn't feel to me like one of those worlds that you're constantly racing to catch up. Yeah. So I am liking it. But I wouldn't say that I'm the best social media person out there. I pay a 17-year-old to do my TikTok page. So I give her a little bit of money every month, and she does TikToks for me. And sometimes she asks me if it's okay, and sometimes she just does them. They're very sweet, they're very cute, and we've got some followers, so
that's great.
I don't understand it, and I'm just more power to her. Yeah.
Because the book that I so love, that I first met him with, was The Map of Lost Memories, a book that I absolutely set in 1925 Shanghai, and it involves Cambodian art treasure, sort of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that, because it's so completely different than Love Saffron.
It is 100% different. You have a 1920s kind of dense, a bit historical novel, and then 10 years later you have a novella that's light I don't know how
content way.
It's
the format, I guess. No.
It's funny because the Map of Lost Memories had so many things in it that I loved, that I wanted to explore, and it was hard for me because I don't think I knew who I was then as a writer. And so that's, I think, why it took so much time with that book. And I don't know if I'd ever write another book like that again, because so much of it that I put into it was personal. You know, my grandfather had been in the Navy in Shanghai, and that was my fascination with that part of the world. I had lived in Southeast Asia for a long time and become fascinated with Andre and Clara Malraux, who were real-life temple robbers. And there were so many things. I'm realizing now as I talk how I guess I don't write books unless there's a real big personal investment in them, and there's something of, not necessarily my personal life, but the world of my world in the book. That said, I am working on another big historical novel, but that one's been in the works for years, just like The Map of Lost Memories. I think that's another thing I would say to writers is, I think I always got stuck a little bit because so many writers write similar books, you know, and then they become known for a certain type of book. And I don't know that I have one certain kind of book in me. I don't know that I'm that kind of writer. And so I think I got stuck a little bit, because if things start going out away from what you've done, you think you're doing something wrong.
And it's a challenge too as a writer, because if people love your first book and you give them something different, are you going to lose them as readers? I
know, and I have no idea. Because I do have people who really love the first book, but I don't know, I haven't heard from them about the second book, or people who've read this and they say, oh, I'm going to go back and read your first book. And I say, just to let you know, it's a little different. it's I like it, but it's just a different story. It's a different kind of book. But yeah, it's hard, Barbara, to talk about it a little bit, because I'm so distanced now from the writing of it. And I haven't read it in so long. I want to, but I'm kind of scared to sit down and read it again. What if I don't like it? What if I'm like, it's a little intimidating.
So you are working on something as a writer?
I'm actually working. Yes, so when I wrote this book and I finished this book, I didn't have any plans to publish it. There was no intention at all. And when I finished it, I knew that I wanted there to be 4 books. You know, I didn't know how long the pandemic was going to last. So I saw in my mind 4 books, a quartet. Not sequels or prequels, but complements. So I have been working, as again, back to that inspiration, being inspired by people I know. My sister and I, right here, just met with cousins here, your sisters, to go through all of my Grammys correspondence. So we have my dad's mom, my aunts and cousins, we've all have bits and pieces. And so we've been going through all of that, and that is inspiring the second book here, which will take place in the early 1950s. And it won't be strictly correspondence again. I don't want to write the same book 4 times. I am trying something different with it, maybe a little more Penelope Lively this time than Laurie Colwin in the structural sense. But yes, I am. I'm trying not to do 14 years, 3 months, 14 years, 3 months, 14 years. I'm going to try and do another, maybe not 3 months, but
maybe a year or so.
Yeah.
Should we see if any of your friends have questions?
My poor family, they're like, we know everything about this. Oh, yay! Hi. I do think so. I do. I wrote this book to remind us of human connection, and I have had everybody from 18-year-olds to 90-year-olds, male and female, read it and connect with the book, which has been really special to me, because I wrote it not to connect with the larger readership. I wrote it to connect with these 2 friends of mine, and also I think enjoying the historical aspect of it, because it does have a lot of 1960s history in it. That's not history. Well, it's apparently anything over 50 years old is historical fiction. So, which when I turned 55, I was like, oh, Oh, so if I write about my toddlerhood, I am now historical fiction. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
For Kim?
No?
Well, I want to thank you for coming, Kim, and sharing
you, John.
these stories with us. We do have copies of Kim's book up at the front, and I know she'd be happy to sign them.
Be happy to sign.
So we'll go ahead and thank everyone who's listening over the internet and you in the audience for joining us for another author program at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you. Ethan, thanks. You applauded.
Yeah, cute.
Thank you. That was lovely.